Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is now 8 o'clock. So that means it is time for us to engage in our very exciting CME topic brought to you by the Continuing Medical Education Department at the Princess Margaret Hospital. Before we begin, as we usually do, let us pray. Father God in heaven, we come before you this morning, thanking you so much for this another day, such a beautiful day, because we are urged that in all things we are to give thanks. So we are truly thankful for this, another opportunity to be here, another opportunity to be educated by one of our colleagues. And we pray, oh God, that you be with the speaker and that you give him clear thoughts, clear minds, and fluent speech as he presents to us today. Open our minds, dear God, that we may be receptive to what he has to say, in knowing that it would improve our overall skills and development, particularly in the area of research. We thank you in all things, oh God. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, thank you and welcome to another continuing medical education. This morning, we are very pleased to bring to you an exciting topic. And our topic today is the art of brevity, an introduction to abstract writing. And presenting to us today is Mr. Alphonso Blake. So for those of you who may not know who Mr. Blake is, I will give you a little sneak peek into who he is. Alphonso Blake is currently a lecturer in epidemiology and research at the School of Clinical Medicine and Research here in Nassau, Bahamas. He is a PhD candidate in epidemiology at UWI, and he also serves as the Public Hospitals Authority UWI Ethics Committee member. He is a proud Caribbean Institute for Health Research alumnus, where he served as medical social worker for persons with sickle cell disease before serving as the training coordinator for the MSc Epidemiology program. He is the winner of 3 research awards in Jamaica and CARFA. He is a mentor to young social workers and epidemiologists in training. His areas of interest include AI use in research, social determinants of health, health-related quality of life, and life course models. So please welcome with me, Mr. Alphonso Blake. Mr. Blake?
Hi, good morning, Dr. Wallace Bain. Thank you very much for that introduction. So I am going to share my screen and begin the presentation. Okay, you can see my screen properly, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much. So we have a 1-hour session, and the title is The Introduction of Brevity. And this is an introduction to abstract writing for research conference. In the interest of time, I think it's best to go through the presentation and then take questions at the end of it. So at that time, we might have a little more time to field questions. So you can write down your question, and then we can discuss. All right, so this is the outline of my presentation. I'll look at what is an abstract, the different types of abstract, the components of an abstract, and some key considerations to take into mind when you're doing an abstract. So an abstract is really a standalone summary of a research project, and it must summarize all the key aspects of your study. You want to look at the why and the how the research was done, what you found, and the implications of your findings. And for this, it can be written once all the research has been completed. There are persons who actually do, but it's a little easier to do once the research is completed. And what it does is also draw critical and obvious. It's the most critical and obvious aim is to draw attention to your study and also to invite persons to want to know more about what you have studied or to come and watch your presentation. Additionally, there may be abstracts for grant requests or for proposal to do research, as many of you would have done. The purpose is to summarize the problems that were investigated, the research methods, the major findings, the discussion, and also the implications of the findings. And what it does, it condenses all the findings and the influence it might have on persons who it might apply to. So that might include policymakers or persons from that population. And you also try to ensure accuracy and relevance and spark further exploration. And persons who might contact you as an author, or they might actually gain an interest into the field that you studied because of reading your abstract. And importantly, I like to say, let's speak to a person at a grade 6 level or the guy in the street corner. So importantly, you want to ensure that you don't add too many discipline-specific jargon or acronyms. So you want to ensure you remove those, because many times for a conference, the person reviewing your abstract isn't a content expert. So you want to ensure that it is written at a level that they can understand what you're saying without having to go to a dictionary or the internet every time they read a sentence. There are two main types of abstract. There are other classifications, but the two main types would be the structured and the unstructured abstract. For the unstructured abstract, it has little to no background, and this might just be one sentence. You might have one or two sentences for the methods, and this will include the study design and the persons who you studied. 2 to 3 for the results, which includes answering your primary hypothesis and your main findings, and then you might have 1 or 2 for your discussion. Mission accomplished, kumbaya. And this is an example of an unstructured abstract. And I can read this for you. So it says, jails may foster the spread of HIV, particularly among drug users. In 2006, male injection drug users detained in Tehran consented to HIV testing at intake and discharge. HIV prevalence at intake was 24.4%. 9 of those who were HIV negative at intake were positive at discharge, and including 1 P24 antigen positive. And the conclusion, jails may be contributing to the rapid spread of HIV in Iran and should be major points for prevention interventions. So, and that was only 77 words, but it gives you a good story as to what they found in their research, and it kind of grab your attention, but it grabbed mine. So you can want to look a little more into what exactly is happening in Tehran here. What we focus on mainly though is the structured abstract. And in many cases, it's important to follow the instructions to the authors. And these may range from between 250 to 350 words. You rarely ever find abstracts going over 350 words. You might find abstracts being 100 or 150 words or 200 words, but not over 350. So what we do here, we tend to have most of our abstracts here between 250 and 300 words. So persons in a DM program, you might be at 300 words for your abstract. For this, you want to include the objectives, which is the primary objective for the paper, the design. So you want to state the principal reason for the procedures you adopt, the methods, which you want to actually outline the procedures you used, the results. Here you want to state the main results of a study, and you want to add some important numerical data, but do not have an overkill. And essentially, end of it, you want to clearly link your conclusion with your research question. This is an example for the structured one. And you see that it's a little more detailed. It provided the objective, a clear objective, and it went into telling you the study design that they used. So cross-sectional design, the number of persons they used, the population of persons, and the instrument that they used to collect the data. And then the result will have a little more information. And this is, we have a little freedom. Just ensure that the result captures what your question is asking. And then conclusively end by connecting the conclusion with your research question. So what should you have in an abstract? Is one that should be clear, concise, and critical needs to be informative, and you want to provide a succinct overview of how the study was conducted, what it found, and what it means for practice. Importantly, the how is important, and the population of that they applied it to is also very important, because you don't want to read an abstract and take the findings from that abstract and apply it to your population, not realizing that the study wasn't the findings weren't meant for the population that you are working in. So the how is always critically important to figure how they did it and who they did it on. So I'll go a little more in detail onto the main headings that you should have in your abstract. You might start with your title, your background and introduction, background/introduction. Some persons might call it one or the other. Same for the aim or objective, the methods, the results. Some persons refer to it as the findings, and the conclusions or the implications of your study. So for your title, it should begin with the title of the work and the names of the authors and the details of at least the institution of the first author. They should be concise and aligned with the content of the abstract, and it can be between 10 to 15 words. A suggested format, you might state your study topic, and then at the end of it, you use a colon and state the study design. So at the end, you just say a cross-sectional study, or a cohort study, or a randomized control trial. And you also want to avoid the use of the term a study of. That's kind of cliche at this point. So try and be a little more dynamic with it rather than just use that overused term. For your background or introduction, it should provide a clear and to the point rationale for why you're doing your study. And this can be 2 to 3 sentences for this section. Unlike the manuscript file for your study, this does not take references unless a journal specifically asks you to put references in the abstract. Most often than not, they never ask you for references in the abstract. And you can also try, this is where you get a little freedom, because you can try to save space here, because you might want to say a little more in your methods and in your results. So you can truncate here if you need to cut from somewhere. So having drafted the abstract and you realize you're over the word limit, you can go back and look at the background or the introduction and make that into a sentence, or just include the aim alone. And the background or the introduction here is really to provide a rationale as to why you're doing the study. And this makes it easy for persons who are not content experts or a person with discipline to follow or to understand the reason why your study was undertaken. The purpose or the aim, it should be a logical flow from the introduction, and this wants to have a clear statement which comprises of what the study set out to do, with whom, and in what context. A simplified way of doing it is to use the ECHO approach, which is normally used in systematic reviews, where you include the participant of interest, the intervention which are using, the comparison group, and the outcome. However, in the cross-sectional designs, we tend to remove the I and the C and use an E. So it looks at the population, the exposure, and the outcome. That's a little more simplified for cross-sectional designs. And then for your methods, this here is, I think I consider myself a methods expert. So this is where you get to say a lot more. And it's important because this helps us to look at the internal and the external validity of whatever you study, if you study findings. And this section should identify the study design, the setting it took place in, the inclusion and exclusion criteria, the sampling approach, the sample size, the procedure used to collect your data, the instrument you used, the reliability of that instrument. Was it piloted? Was it validated in your setting? The data analysis approaches, the data protection considerations, and ethical considerations. Yes, it might say it's a very long list, but you may not include all of these points here, and you can truncate accordingly based on your word count. So you want to start with everything at first, and then based on where you are, you go back and say, okay, I can take out this line, I can put this here. So that's why you have to do it, not just once, but a couple of times. And for this, you can actually, let's say you can remove exclusion criteria. You can just keep setting as location. You can put the sample size in the results. Also for this, another way of doing it, you can also include the exposure and the outcome variable, and probably also the how you handle missing data. Then this is where a lot of persons, what a lot of persons want to see, what were your results? And this should actually link to your introduction, the aim, and your methods. And it should be consistent with the population you studied, the exposure, and the outcome of interest. And you want to try as best as possible to avoid vague results statements here. So here, you don't use opinions, you just state exactly what the results were, and you want to avoid explaining what these results are. However, you can include your measures of effect or association, like your p-values, your confidence intervals, and your odds ratios. Long and short, do not overcomplicate it. And then from that, you can have your conclusions. So you do not state any new results in this section. You can have a maximum of 3 sentences here. And you want to provide a clear answer for your conclusion that directly links to your research question. So having a research question, you want to ensure that the conclusion answers that question. Also, you want to provide an insight or an interpretation as to what the findings may mean to the intended audience or the study participants as it relates to things like their behavior change, policies, or if you think a different type of research might be needed. And the last sentence might just be a recommendation as to how to address the key findings from that study. You also want to be realistic. You can mention the impact of the study. Do not make conclusions beyond what the results show. So even though you might be thinking it, if it's not in the results, it doesn't make sense to add it as a statement. And more studies are needed. It has become cliche. So you probably want to change that text, right? So one way of looking at it, you might consider study design changes, statistical approaches changes, rather than just saying more studies are needed, right? And you want to proofread and get feedback from as many persons as possible. And what I like to say is you want to get persons who are not from a discipline or from an area of expertise to look at it and see what questions they might ask. If they have questions that you can't answer, it means that something is not clear. And then the next big part of it is authorship. So I've added the QR code here so you can actually scan the code and get this link. For authorship, it follows the ICMJE guidelines. And this, you want to decide who can be an author on your paper. So for persons who have provided substantial contributions to the conception or the design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or the interpretation of data, those persons can be listed as author. For persons who are involved in the drafting of the work or revising it critically using intellectual content, those persons can be an author because they actually add something of value to it. And this person also provides final approval of the version to be published. And this person also agreed to be accountable for all aspects of the work. So you will never be able to say that I didn't do that part. Once you're an author on the document, it means that you have responsibility for everything in the document. And in the advent of AI, you do not list AI as an author. For some journals, they might ask you to highlight if you had the use of any large language models or any AI software to help you with your writing. So they want to know, but you do not list it as an author. Importantly, in the author list, the first author is normally the person who conceives and writes the abstract and will present the abstract at the conference. And the last author, especially in the medical sciences field, is seen as the senior author or the principal investigator. And the other positions such as the corresponding author, and this person is the person who the conference will liaise with once they have questions. So that's pretty much what the components of the abstract. But then there are some key considerations. Why really do you need a perfect abstract? Because this becomes freely accessible even when the manuscript file isn't accessible. And it helps the reader to actually sift through what you want to include in a literature review or what you don't want. And most times this is the only part of research that a lot of persons will read, because it's a very good summary, and it tells you if this research actually match what you're looking for or not. And there are persons who cite this, but ethically, it's not recommended to just cite it from the abstract. You need to actually read the paper to cite. And then once you submit into a journal or a conference, this is in most cases, I think for us here, except for CARPA, for asking for a 6-pager, but in most cases, they just ask you for an abstract. And this is what the screening committee will see, and this is what they'll use to tell you if you're accepted to present at that conference or not. A good abstract indicates the purpose of the study and the methods that were used, and it provides, in a precise manner, the results of your study. Importantly, conferences, journals, they always have submission guidelines. You want to pay attention to these, because this might tell you how many words include in the abstract. If it's 250 or 300 words, it tells you what information you should add to the document, the format they're using. So the format might be structured or unstructured, yes, but then some person might ask you for a background or introduction, an aim, the methods, the results, the conclusion, or some person might phrase it differently. The subjective, procedure, findings, discussion, conclusion. So you want to look for those to see what headings they want, and ensure that you tick off those headings rather than just writing based on what you probably knew from before. It also tells you what is the deadline for it, the year of the conference, and where it's going to be. If it's going to be virtual, it's going to be hybrid, or it's going to have a specific location. Also, so once you're presenting at a conference, they might need to introduce you. So you probably can consider drafting a professional biography upfront, which once they ask for it, you can submit to the conference organizing team, which means you won't end up with a surprise when they have to introduce you and they don't know what to say. Importantly also, reviews are conducted blindly, which means that persons will not know that you're the one submitting it. So it will be done very objectively. And the persons, and a lot of us might have anxiety when we have to present at a conference or an event. But the thing is, the persons who ask you to present, or the persons who have selected the abstract for presentation, they are confident that your work fits their objectives, which is why they actually invited you to come and present. Hence, you will be seen as the content expert at that point. So persons are going to come to you asking you, how did you do your work? It's not really asking any questions that you could know at that point. Importantly, you want to keep your sentences short. So you don't want to have long-winded statements, because this makes life a little more complicated for the reader than it should be. You want to remove the phrases which are used to link sentences, get rid of the unnecessary and the moreover, however, hence, therefore, and you can make use of some semicolons. And if you realize that you have a word occurring multiple times, it doesn't mean to change it. You want to actually rewrite that sentence. And unnecessary adjectives are not needed. You can take them out. And then in doing this, based on your study design, there are actually established criteria for how you should actually put together your report. And the equator is one such, and this is a QR code again. You can actually access the equator guideline from. And this outlines how to write the abstract, or things that should include in the abstract, if it's a cross-sectional design, a cohort design, clinical trial, a records-based study, any of those. It has guidelines as to how you should do it. And you want to practice to say less where necessary. Results will be presented and discussed. You can avoid that. Most cases, if you're submitting your abstract before you have completed your study altogether, you will have some preliminary results, and you can actually present those preliminary results in your abstract, which should include maybe the main answer to one of your objectives that you have. Once it's accepted, you have the liberty to go back and make amendment to the final abstract, because most times they reach out back to you and say, okay, we're at the stage of doing our final publication, so please send us the final draft of your abstract so they can actually publish that. So by then you would have had a little more time to go through your results and have some better presented results. And also, even for the conference, you might have updated the results by then. So you just want to ensure that it keeps in line with the objective of the conference and of your objective for your research. And again, references should not be included in the abstract. And you also want to have, as I mentioned before, an independent person read it. And I think that happens very often. Some persons have done some really, really good work, but then they weren't able to put together an abstract in a proper way. So the journal or the conference rejected it because of that. So in summary, you want to include the title, the authors on your study, the institution, the email address, the objective or the introduction, which is what is the rationale, what is the single objective you want to convey. Oh, and to add, so if you do a check, you will find, so if for papers that only has like one author, most times it's probably not accepted by a journal. So you want to have more than one author to your paper. You also want to ensure that your title is, you don't want to be too, let's say, trivial about it. You want to ensure that it's written in an academic way and it can capture a person's attention. And it also has a study design written in it. So that can tell persons, when persons are screening, they look for these things to see if it matches their inclusion criteria. Additionally, your methods, some simple questions you want to answer. Where did the participants come from? What kind of measurements were used? How many persons were involved in your study? What statistical approaches were used? Or were your data protected? What ethical body provided oversight? Because this is important because internationally, once you're doing studies, they have ethical bodies around which are responsible for ensure that the research do no harm to the participants and also to ensure that proper guidelines are followed. So the person on these ethics committee should ensure that once they've approved these studies, these things are actually observed. For your results, what was the response rate? What were the baseline characteristics of a sample? And what were the key findings that you had? And in conclusion, what is the answer to your overall research question? As I said, connect your conclusion to your research question. If you didn't have a research question up front, you want to revise your aim and make it in the form of a question so that it has an answer to it. When you have a question, you can have an answer to it. It makes it a lot more understandable for you and for the persons reading it. And you can also make one recommendation from your conclusion. And again, remember, do not use any reference in your abstract. These are some of our references. Questions and comments, I can take those notes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blake. We're having a little bit of feedback there. Okay, that's better. Thank you so much for your presentation. You provided us with a lot of useful information that can truly help all of us as we seek to write better abstracts in our research. So as we open the floor for questions and comments, before we do that, I would just like to draw everyone's attention to the feedback link that is posted in the chat. Also, for those of you who have signed in with initials or with your phone as your name, I kindly ask you to change that to reflect the name that would be on your BMC certificate. That is very important. So go ahead and quickly change that for me. And we will now take questions and comments. Okay, so we have some comments that are coming in. Great information. Thank you, Mr. Blake. Thank you, Mr. Blake. We're getting a good amount of thank yous for the valuable information that you have provided. Do we have any questions for Mr. Blake? Mr. Blake, it seems that you were quite clear and direct. Everyone completely and fully understand everything that you have to say. Okay, we have a question. What makes a good poster abstract?
Okay, a poster abstract. Well, for conferences, Dr. Curtis, the same abstract you submit for oral presentation should be the same abstract presented for a poster. So for some persons, they want to, if they want to, so some conferences, they divide between if you're given a oral presentation or a post presentation. There's at that point that you get to decide, get to adjust your abstract or your poster to fit that setting. For you, if you have a poster, you'll get to say a little more than the 250 words. You want to use graphical adaptations to ensure that persons can actually, let's say, be more interested in your abstract or in your poster. You want to use color blocks rather than make it a little too busy. So you want to ensure that the font is at the appropriate size. Let me know if I'm answering your question, Dr. Curtis, if that's what you're asking me. Okay, yeah, so you want to ensure it's at the appropriate size. And so for this, I think you can use, it's where you can use graphical depictions like charts or tables to ensure that persons can actually speak to. What I like to say, if you're given a poster presentation, it's presented just in the same format as an oral presentation, but you get to present a lot more often than the person would have done an oral presentation. That person presents only once. You have to present that multiple times because you can have a different person walking up to your poster many different times and asking you questions about it. So if you get to know it well enough, you can actually articulate yourself for persons to actually get what your study is about. Fair enough?
Okay, thank you for that. We have more comments. I love your comment. Do not make conclusions on factors, variables you did not study in your research. That's very important. Very informative. Samsung SM. Can you please change your name to reflect what should be on your BMC certificate, please? Thank you. Very informative and yet succinct presentation. Well, you did live up to the name of your topic. Is it possible to get a copy of the presentation emailed to interested persons?
I can send it to you.
Thank you. Dr. Curtis indicated that, yes, you answered him. Would this presentation be available for sharing? If so, may I please have a copy? And the email is attached.
Yeah.
Okay, a reminder to all of you that the video recording in the feedback area is the link provided. So please check that out. It is posted up top. I will repost it for those of you who may have joined after. Is there a limit to the number of tables or graphs you can put on a poster presentation for a conference?
That's a very good question. So it goes back to the point I made earlier. It's always important to review the guidelines from the conference because they have clear guidelines as to what you can put into it. So some person might tell you the size of your poster. They might tell you how many, what is the font size, how many tables and diagrams you might have on it, if you should include a reference list on it, those kind of things. But for some persons, with that question, you can just, I propose ensure you have a first table, table 1, which is your descriptive characteristics, or a chart that provides who were involved in your study. And then you can have another diagram which represents the main findings that answer the key objective or the research question that you had. Thereafter, anything else is kind of fluid.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Burnett Garraway sends her thanks for the presentation. And again, I have posted the links below. You have the YouTube link there, as well as the feedback for this morning's presentation, as well as the enrollment key. Once again, if your name does not reflect the name that is on your BMC, can you kindly take this opportunity to change that. So this was a very informative presentation. Mr. Blake, you know, we tend sometimes to be very wordy people. And every time it's time to write an abstract, you're ready to pull your hair out because it's like, how do they want me to say all of this wonderful research that I have just done? And you want me to condense this down into just a few words. So to be able to do that is indeed an art. It goes beyond a skill. It's a fine art to be able to do that and to convey the important information so that what you want to be known comes out at the very beginning and make others interested in your abstract. I can tell you when I'm going through scientific journals and I'm reading abstracts, I'm looking and this isn't very intriguing, or, oh yeah, this definitely caught my attention and I definitely want to read this. So very, very important. Great information. Yeah, so we thank you so much. Let me just double check to make sure I've not missed any information. No, okay, great. So thank you again so much for providing us this very useful topic. I hope that all of the residents were taking notes. If you didn't get a chance to take notes, not to worry. He is gracious enough to allow us to have the presentation so that you can review it on your personal time. And if you have any other direct questions that you want to ask him, I'm sure you know how to find him. But for those who do not know how or where to find him, Mr. Blake, you can let people know how they can contact you.
Sure. You cannot, I mean, at the SCMR, I'm always here. And I'm posting my email addresses in the chat again. They're on the first slide of my presentation. So any of these two addresses should work. So you can send me an email here, and most often than not, I tend to respond to your emails.
Okay, perfect.
To reach me.
Perfect. Also, another reminder.
Before I go, so we do have our conference coming up, and which is the SCMR Research Conference in October, November, thereabout. And we're now open for abstract submission. So I want persons to draft the abstract and submit it as soon as it's possible for us, so we can actually review those abstracts and accept them. So I do expect most of the persons on here to get an abstract from most persons here. And you can submit it at abstracts.sunshinelearner.com.
Absolutely. We look forward every year, I know I do, to the research date. We usually get some really good research projects. And I'm looking forward this year to seeing what is the latest research being done by our UE students. So again, guys, please ensure to get those abstracts written and make sure they are written with the art of brevity. And I'm sure Mr. Blake will be looking forward to see if you use his many useful suggestions for writing your abstract.
Definitely.
And there is the email that you are to submit your abstracts to. So thank you all for taking the time to join us this morning for another continuing medical education. Thank you again, Mr. Blake, for taking the time to be here with us and to provide us with this useful information. I encourage you all to have a wonderful day, and we'll see you at the next CME session. Have a great day.